Hey everyone, this is Finn. In this series of videos, I'm going to analyze each of my four losses from the last year in the classical chess. So in the last year, I've played 22 games, rated classical games, and lost four. About four or five were draws, and the rest were wins. So it's my most successful year in chess. I gained over 100 rating points. I'm very happy about that. However, I did have some bad losses, and I really want to analyze those losses to see where I went wrong and how I can avoid that kind of loss in future. So hopefully that's going to be instructive for you, the viewer, as well. Let's have a look now at the first game then. Now, there's a little bit of a common theme of my losses from this season, and that is opening disasters. So let me show you what happened in this game. So White played c4, the English opening. I go e6. And then my opponent kind of surprised me with this move, e4. And to be honest, from this point, I started spending quite a bit of time, even just on the first few moves, because this is not a move order that's I could remember facing before. Now, in the end, I played the move c5, and this transposes into an opening called the Kramnik Sicilian, where you can see White has this Maroczy bind structure clamping down on the d5 square. Now, this is perfectly playable for Black, but I don't particularly like the resulting positions, partly because of bad memories of what happened in this game. And in future, I'm going to play a simpler move, d5, in this position. It's a perfectly safe move because White can't keep this pawn after knight f6, and you don't have to bring your queen immediately into the center where it could be kicked by the knight or anything. You can just recapture this pawn with the knight, and Black is absolutely fine here. So this is a simple way to play, and the Maroczy bind has already disintegrated, right, which is something I'd be more comfortable with. But okay, I tried c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. And here I start thinking, because I'm not sure what to do. I think my first instinct was to play bishop c5. And I ruled this out, but on the basis of a very sloppy calculation. So my thought was bishop c5, bishop e3, and I was kind of worried that my bishop on c5 might be a loose piece, because in this position, White would be threatening knight takes c6 with a discovered attack against the bishop on c5. But this is actually not anything to be afraid of, since after bishop e3, Black has the move queen b6, and Black is absolutely fine here. It's just no problem. You've got pressure on b2, you've got pressure on d4. I mean, White maybe can take on c6, but even then, bishop takes e3 is a problem. And they don't want to mess up their pawns, and this is actually not very good for White. So I really should have given more time in my thoughts to looking at bishop c5, which is a good move. So my thought process was already a bit off at this point, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I was spending a lot of time. I thought I would play bishop b4 check instead. Now, okay, so what's the point of this move? Well, I anticipated that knight c3 would probably be played. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm going to have the option of giving White double pawns. However, I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about playing this, because even though White's getting double pawns, the pawn on c3 is actually helping control d4, which is quite useful. The pawns are quite hard to attack, and White would get the bishop pair. So I wasn't too enthralled about going for this bishop takes c3. But then I also just wasn't sure what else to do here because, okay, I wanted to develop normally with knight f6, but what was concerning me was after takes, white would have this move e5 kind of gaining a tempo. Now, for some reason, I didn't realize that in this position, black can play knight e4, you exploiting the pin. And actually, black is doing totally fine here. White didn't really gain anything from spending time on this advance. They would have been better off simply developing. So I was already kind of seeing ghosts in this position, and I felt like I couldn't develop my knight to its best square f6. But actually, this would be really the only way to justify bishop b4. What I've got out of bishop b4 is this pin, and the pin makes the e4 square more weak. So, knight f6 is really had to be the follow-up here. And unfortunately, I was seeing ghosts, and I decided to play bishop takes c3 check. I already didn't like my position, but I just wasn't sure what else to do because I thought, yeah, I mean, I guess I could have played though. Probably other moves here are better than what I did. I guess I just thought, at least after this, we've got a kind of imbalanced position, and maybe in the long run, I could get some joy from attacking these double pawns. So, very, very poor thought process from me, to be honest. And this is already quite an unpleasant position for black. It gets even worse after my next move, a6, which is definitely a mistake, but it's kind of an understandable mistake. Because, okay, by the way, I'm still worried about knight f6, knight c6, e takes c6, e5. Because now it's not so clear that the knight is going to be happy on e4 anyway. So, queen c2 now, and okay, I mean, maybe this is fine, knight c5, but then bishop e3, white's kind of developing with tempo. And yeah, this actually feels quite unpleasant. The lead in developments plus the bishop pair, yeah, is now annoying. So I didn't want to play knight f6. And then I'm also thinking, oh God, I'm worried about the d6 square being weak. Now, notice how the absence of the dark square bishop has just made my dark squares super, super weak. So I was thinking, I don't really want to allow this, hence a6, which makes some sense. The problem is that it's just so slow. So, my development is going to be super slow now. And, white can really exploit that. Okay, so bishop d3 was played, a good developing move. d6, another move which doesn't develop. And here's the thing, I mentioned those weak dark squares. Well, bishop a3 is on the cards, and the pawn would actually be happier on d7, funnily enough. So, this was not good. I think knight f6 may have been possible here. It does feel a bit uncomfortable because e5 now is somewhat annoying. There's no knight g4, no knight e4, no knight d5, so you probably have to go back. But then, since the pieces have been traded off, the knights on d4 and c6 have been traded off, maybe you can afford the loss of time. So, at least, yeah, maybe this was the lesser of two evils. d6 was not good. It just weakens my position. And if I really didn't think knight f6 was okay, then I probably should have at least gone here with the knights, and yeah, then I'm not left with this weak pawn. Okay, so anyway, I played d6, white castles. I play knight ge7. And okay, yeah, so at this point, I definitely am aware that I'm somewhat worse. It doesn't feel like I've got easy development here, and White's position seems very healthy. But I was kind of thinking that I might just about get out of it. Maybe I can complete development now, castling, playing b6, bishop b7, and maybe I'm going to kind of live to fight another day in this game. Unfortunately, my opponent then plays queen h5, and this move was a bit like a cold shower, because now I'm noticing the fact that not only is the queen in a good position to attack the king side already, but also these bishops are rather nicely placed. So, okay, I wanted to castle, but I was kind of getting scared about this position. So I think one interesting idea would be for White to play f4 here, and literally just to try and blast open the king side. So it's not immediately lost for Black or anything, but this looked quite unpleasant to me. Another idea is to bring the rook out and do a rook lift and then start attacking. I think that's also, yeah, a very interesting way to play. So here's the problem, though. In my thought process in the game, that was very much my thought process. I thought Queen h5, castles kingside looks scary for Black, so I shouldn't play it. That's not great. I can say I really should have done more calculation to investigate whether castles was actually playable or not. Because yes, okay, White is definitely going to get some kind of attack. There's simply no way of avoiding that. But is it the end of the world? And is there scope for Black to punish blunders? And is the position still alive? I mean, absolutely yes. So I really needed to investigate this further to try and really figure out whether this is tenable at all for Black, which I didn't really do in the game. Partly because I was already under some time pressure. I mean, I'd say I probably had something like 40 minutes left in this position, and my opponent had about 70 minutes. So, you can tell that my weird opening play and poor opening play, it wasn't like I was just rushing into it. I was trying to work out the best way of dealing with my problems, but just not really making the best choices. So I should have nevertheless spent some more time in this position trying to calculate what happens after castles. By the way, the idea of f4, one main idea is to play e5 next, and once the move e5 is played, yeah, there will be a threat of checkmate on h7. So, I mean, I think this is hard to defend for Black already. There's no doubt about it. Now, I wonder. Let's think. See if we can find moves for Black here. So, if we go g6, what's the punishment? So, I mean, I'm thinking White might even just want to drop all the way back, and then at some point there's going to be bishop h6, and this doesn't seem strategically desirable, just because of how weak the dark squares are. There's also maybe okay, so maybe we take here and then try f5 or something, just trying to clog up the king side and halt any attack. See, this kind of thing doesn't look as bad as what I got in the game eventually. Although I am seeing that there would be this annoying rook lift. So that looks pretty really annoying. And yeah, potentially, I don't know, can you go rook f6, rook h6? Um, okay, maybe this is not too terrible. So, I mean, yeah, castles looked kind of scary to castle into this attack, but whether it was really that bad, I felt I didn't have time to fully check it. Now, in this position, there was a certain error in my thought process because I started thinking castles looks too scary. So I can naturally look for alternatives, right? And I thought, hang on a second. One of the things I don't like about the position is white queen being very active, especially active near to where my king wants to go. So here's a smart idea: queen a5 and just try and trade off the queens. Because the thing is, if he doesn't trade the queens, I've got queen takes c3, and that could start being interesting, and I might get some counterplay there, potentially quite serious counterplay. Targeting the pawns. So okay, then I ask myself, well, if white does trade the queens and this position arises, am I happy or am I not happy? And I remember thinking, not very happy is the answer because my development is bad. None of my pieces are well placed, and uh, there's no piece coordination, and you know I'm not doing anything active at this moment. On the other hand, in the long run, if I can play bishop d7, rook c8, and start targeting the weak pawns, maybe it's not so bad. So I kind of talked myself into believing that this position would be tenable. Spoiler alert, it's not tenable. And, I didn't even see this move coming. So, like, when I chose to play queen a5, I really needed to check this position, and I needed to have a plan in this position for how I would be coping with bishop a3. I did not have a plan for how I'd be coping with bishop a3 in this position. So lo and behold, my opponent takes the queen and plays bishop a3, obviously attacking that weak pawn on d6. Remember on move 4 when I gave up my dark squared bishop, and then remember later on when I left a pawn on d6 just sitting on a dark square, like inviting for a bishop to come and take it. Yeah, so you can see how I'm paying for my sins in the opening phase of the game right now. So now I'm thinking, okay, I've made a bit of an oversight. This position is definitely bad because like I wanted to get on with development. I needed to kind of get my pieces active somehow, and now it seems that I've got to waste time, even more time, defending this terrible weakness. I'm not super scared about just losing a pawn, and it's in and of itself, but I am scared about a monster living on the d6 square for the rest of this game, and it can be easily supported by one of these pawns as well. So I did not want to allow that. Now, I mean, my thought process at this point was I can't let d6 hang, so I think the only real option is king d7. Of course, it's not a move that I wanted to play because now, my development is really awkward and, the king is not good. But I guess I just didn't see an alternative. So probably at this point of the game, I had something like 35 minutes. Um, and, I played king d7 and thought, right, okay, I am fighting for a draw at this point. I didn't quite appreciate how bad the position was because it's terrible. And okay, if I'd looked ahead a little more, I think I could have anticipated White's very strong plan with f4. Um, we'll see in a minute why this was so powerful for White, but this was really my last chance to maintain a playable position. And I think this would actually be very interesting positional exercise and calculation exercise for you. So see if you can find a better move than king d7 in this position. Okay, so the best way to try and hold on here is actually to play the move e5. Now, okay, there are quite a few lines here, but I just show you one of the main lines that I've analyzed. So let's say knight f3. Knight f3 maintains pressure on black's center pawns, right? So the idea is keep an eye on e5, because when d6 seemingly inevitably drops, e5 is also going to be super weak, right? So knight f3 makes sense. But then black starts getting counterplay by targeting white's weakness here, the double pawns. So the pawn on c4 becomes weak already. Okay, white can play bishop d6, knight takes c4, let's say. And if this exchange happens, we're kind of gaining some time, right? We're attacking the rook. We're also putting some pressure on this isolated pawn on a2. So this is not so bad. I mean, okay, yeah, this is quite a nice idea. It would have been difficult to see this in advance, but knight c8, gaining a tempo on the bishop, bishop takes. And yeah, I mean, white is a pawn up, and no doubt white is better. There's also pressure here, but and pressure here, but this doesn't seem like the end of the world. So okay, maybe black can play f6. Say the bishop comes to d4, and now maybe let's say b5. And okay, maybe it's not the end of the world. White is definitely better, but I like this position a lot more than what I got in the game. It's not immediately clear how white's actually going to win. Let's say a4, but there's knight d6 here, and yeah, the b5 pawn has some defense. I think it's got enough defense, right? Because in this position, while the a pawn is pinned, there's no immediate way for white to put more pressure on b5. So this is bad, but it's not the end of the world. So really nice, basically pawn sacrifice here, which is not so hard to find as long as you're kind of looking for activity, right? So, e5 is a forcing move, knight f3, bishop e6, using the space you created with the pawn push to counterattack. So, unfortunately, this idea just did not occur to me at all. Now, what can I learn from this? What I can learn is don't just play a move like king d7 just simply because your pawn is hanging. And also don't play a move that gets you in a bad position unless you've really checked every other alternative and made sure that every other alternative is really worse than the one that you're thinking of going for. And again, spending more time on the clock, right? So if I'd spent maybe another 10 minutes, I wouldn't have ended up in lost position. Now, to be fair, I didn't realize that this was lost until my opponent played the move f4. And I didn't see that move coming when I played king d7. Also, notice a common theme here: lack of foresight of my opponent's moves, lack of calculation of what my opponent would do in response to my move. That's just not good enough. But f4, and it's really game over here, because although there are no queens on the board, white has a huge attack. And from this point, it's just super hard to defend. It's super hard to activate black's pieces, and f-file pressure is a very real thing in this position. My opponent played great, and he finished me off, with aplomb here. So e5, just breaking open the position, threatening d6. I chose to play d5, which is bad, but this also, I think, fails because, okay, there's e takes, f7 is hanging. Let's say I go here. How should white proceed here? Okay, so I mean, doubling on the F file looks good, just increasing the pressure there. It's just very hard position for black to play here. Maybe this is a bit better than what I actually did. So taking here. Is there anything else? So it takes. This pawn on h7 is hanging, but it's not clear whether. Well, I don't think white can actually take it because then the bishop will get trapped. So, okay. Let's say white tries to double. So we try and develop. Yeah, I'm not seeing how you were going to defend against this. So yeah, I think this position is already deeply suspect. I tried to avoid the F file opening up by playing d5, but then c takes d5, knight takes d5, and f5. This is the kind of killer blow. Now the F file is opening up by force. Okay, so takes, and yeah. So this rook f8 check is a really nice resource, and now my king stuck in the center is in huge trouble. I mean, I could have gone like this way, but it leads to a very similar thing. So I don't think this really helps. And actually, I think part of the problem here is that these pawns are just all dropping off. And, black's pieces are just so uncoordinated, it's not even funny. Okay, so yeah. So in the real game, this happens, this check happens, and doubling on the F file. I desperately try and bring my knight back to defend, but then this happens. Okay, so in this position, kind of looks like black might be holding things together, but then there's this forcing rook takes, king takes, and c4, and I'm losing the knight on e7 or the knight on d5 now. So yeah, I resigned in this position because it just seems totally hopeless. So this one of these knights is going to drop off. Okay, great. So the way the game finished off is not of huge consequence to me because I think, it's clear that it was a terrible position. Maybe I could have been slightly more resilient, but I think to me the really interesting points, the lessons from this game are twofold. So firstly, once this bad position arises, be tenacious, find the most challenging possible line. And I think it's clear that this line with e5, bishop e6, counter-attacking, is a lot more challenging to white. This would be much harder for white to win. And I have dreams of castling in this position. Maybe I will even get to castle. That would be nice. So whereas in this situation, yeah. So I mean, I think like here, I actually do have realistic prospects of castling, and the pieces are just so much more in play. So that is something that I feel I really should have been able to find during the game. The other thing I want to say is just the way the opening was mishandled. So giving up the dark square bishop way too easily. Just left me with terrible weaknesses. And then, you know, when you have weaknesses in the opening, quick development becomes all the more essential. Hence why A6 was a terrible idea. All right, so that's my summary of my first loss of the 2021 to 2022 season. I hope you got something from that. And take care. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye.